Hey, baby, it's Bonnie DeShong, and this is Bonnie's Eye, where we have great conversations with interesting people. And as we know, Juneteenth is June 19th, and it's going to be a great time. I have been asked to be the MC for the Juneteenth with Light Up Lawndale here in the Chicago area, and I just can't wait. And we have with us today, we have Miss Erica Griffin, who is the Elizabeth F. Cheney Director of Education at the Chicago History Museum. And we also have Chelsea Ridley, who is the co-founder of the Lawndale Pop Up Spot and project director for North Lawndale Reads at Open Books. That's a long thing, Chelsea.
Yeah, I stay busy.
Well, ladies, I'm so glad that you're on with me today because Juneteenth is now a holiday, but so many people really don't know what Juneteenth is about. So, Erica, give us a overview of what Juneteenth really is about.
Absolutely, Bonnie. And let me first say how honored I am to be here with you and with Chelsea. It has been too long since we've been able to fellowship and be with one another. And I couldn't think of a better time to be together with you two than to celebrate an event, a moment in our country's history that should be celebrated by everyone. And rightly so, it is getting the visibility that it has needed. So Juneteenth. It is an amalgam of the word June and the 19th, and June the 19th of 1865 was a pivotal day in our country's history. We all have heard through our education, and probably around about sixth grade, maybe seventh, that the Emancipation Proclamation that was issued in 1863 was that document that ultimately gave freedom to all those that were of African descent in bondage in the American South. But as always with history, it's never so black and white. There are lots of shades of gray around emancipation and freedom, especially, as I mentioned, for those that were enslaved. So at the time, our country didn't extend from sea to shining sea as we know it. And Texas was a newer territory. And many folks, many slave owners, those who existed and profited off of the trade of people of African descent and off of their labor, still wanted to get in that last harvest. So when the Emancipation Proclamation was issued by President Abraham Lincoln, some folks picked up and moved their entire enterprises into Texas because whether that space was going to be, how it was going to be designated at that time was still unclear a bit. And slavery could still, the profiting off of, forced labor was still a consideration or still an option in Texas. So those that were interested in having that final harvest before, enslavement as, it was conducted at the time was going to change, that happened. So folks picked up, moved operations into Texas, had those final harvests. And believe it or not, it was not until about 2.5 years after the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation that news that freedom had already come made its way to Texas. So on June the 19th, 1865 is when Union soldiers came in and announced that order. Now, even at that time, although the announcement was made, freedom had already come, you all are free. It still wasn't exactly an immediate that the over 200,000 enslaved people that were in Texas were made so. But Juneteenth, that particular day when that announcement was made, it resonates for lots of different reasons. One, it's the, symbolic freeing of people that had been enslaved. And it's also this symbolic adherence to our nation's founding documents that everyone is created equal and that, this idea of liberty for all should be extended to all. So for me, Juneteenth is a moment when those words were made more real, not crystal clear. That's certainly not true, but more real and more tangible for a larger group of folks beyond, the traditional scope that obviously we know those words were written for white men that were money, that had land. Juneteenth is a day where that idea of freedom, that idea of liberty, these quote unquote American ideals were leveraged against a larger audience that, those who did not have all of a sudden had. And it's a legacy that we have to be mindful of and that should be celebrated because it impacts all of us, not just African American people, but everyone is impacted by Juneteenth, and everyone should know what it is and should celebrate and honor and commemorate accordingly. If you ask me.
Well, the thing is, you think of the Emancipation Proclamation and the enslaved people being free, but until all enslaved people were free, none of us really were free. And Chelsea, you look like you had something you wanted to jump in and say.
No. The only other thing I was going to say that this year Juneteenth is on Father's Day, which makes it an even more special day to come out and celebrate two things on one day.
And you're right. And Erica, when you were talking, something jumped out in my head when you were talking about the Constitution and that all men are created equal. But you were right. It was all men are created equal. Women still weren't equal. Enslaved people weren't equal. It does, that one line means a whole lot. And even with the Juneteenth coming in, even at that point, the enslaved people were free, but the women still weren't in ways. You know what I mean? Even though they didn't have to work in the fields or they were whatever, women still were in their place. But it also brought to mind, even at Juneteenth, where did the enslaved people go? Did they just jump up and say, okay, we leaving, what do we do now?
That's a good point, Bonnie. Just because you have been, whatever your situation was, free or enslaved, just because, these words go out there, remember these symbolic actions happen, doesn't mean that, your life changes overnight. There are degrees of freedom. And I can say this before I dive into your point about where we went, that those ideals, the words in our declaration have, whether we realize it or not, but have informed social movements over time in the US since that moment. We are all trying to make those words more real, more tangible, more full for larger amounts of people over time. That's what every subsequent movement is going back to, that idea that, all besides all men, all people. What does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to be a man? How do we make these ideals real for more people? What sort of legislation has to happen? How do we change people's hearts and minds? So all of the moments that we can think about, from civil rights to the Black Panthers to women's movements and suffrage to, Roe versus Wade to the Board of Education, they all stem back to those founding documents. And it has been the task, it has been a priority, it has been a part of Black existence to activate those words. We are the ultimate measuring stick that really indicates how close or far away our country is from making those words honest, to making them true. There is a long way to go. We are by no means at a place where equality and equity and, all of these ideals are inherent, that they are simply a part of how we operate, but we continue the good fight, and we have all of those moments to build on, which is why history is so important, which is why celebrating Juneteenth is something that everyone should do. It's not just an event for, Black people. It's not just a history for a certain type of people. It's for everybody. Now, before I get on my soapbox, I'm gonna go back and I'll answer your question about movement. So that's a great question. At the end of the Civil War, Black people, were no longer in bondage or owned by the situation had changed. But did that mean that Black people could all of a sudden pick up and go somewhere? Not necessarily. You still need to have money to get where you're going. There are places where Black people were still not going to be welcome. You're talking about a population of people that hadn't been trained in other skills for the most part, other than, agricultural pursuits. So options were limited. And, you found a lot of Black people that simply stayed where they were. And, that's where you get sharecropping coming into prevalence. Black people could, grow crops. They could work on a parcel of land, but the rules and parameters were still determined by those that had been in power before. You really don't find or didn't find Black people coming up out of the South until World War I. That's decades after the ending of the Civil War, and they were coming up out of the South to the North to get jobs in, the newly industrialized cities like Chicago. But we know that when people move, it's not just themselves that, is transported from one place to another. It's their ideals, what they value, how they eat, how they celebrate. All those things move with people as well, which is part of the reason why the Juneteenth holiday has moved all across the country. You have Black people coming up out of Texas, sharing their history with other Black people. You have people coming to Chicago doing the same thing. Interestingly enough, the city of Chicago celebrated Emancipation Day around the same time that, the Civil War was still being fought. There were Black people that were free living in Chicago, and they chose to commemorate and celebrate. When the Emancipation Proclamation was issued, it was a celebration. It was one of those steps in the right direction toward liberty, toward equality, the same path that we're on. Chicago celebrated it way back then. And now that, Juneteenth is a holiday that is on everyone's hearts, on everyone's minds, it's celebrated right here in the city as well. So the idea of celebrating milestones, the idea that there were holidays that were sort of unknown, but were celebrated nonetheless by different populations is a reality we have to contend with. But now that Juneteenth has this national visibility, we should all be engaging. We should all be learning. We should all be thinking back on that moment and how it has fueled the fire towards subsequent moments so that we can think for the future. What might we be able to celebrate in another 50 years, in another 100? I think also about Chicago's legacy of action and activist work. We know that the origins of Black History Month as we know it also started right here in Chicago. Chicago's been a place for conversations and action toward these ends. And I know that more will come for the city of Chicago. We're always on the front lines and we continue to be in the vanguard. And, who knows, our next generations are leading the way with that historical precedent in mind. So we'll see what comes next.
Now, you can see why Erica is definitely a plethora for education. She has always been that way. The three of us worked together at the DuSable Museum many years ago, and Erica and her mind and her love of education has always been there. Chelsea, you were getting ready to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what especially about all men are created equal, and thinking about how that applies to Juneteenth and the work that we're doing now. It's great to understand our history, but we have to really use this as a rallying cry. All men are created equal, because Juneteenth was a celebration of emancipation, but we know that legislation was made after that to try to put Black people back in chains, whether that's through incarceration or through oppression, all these sorts of things. And so now we really need to think of this, all men are created equal, as a rallying cry, and take our time on Juneteenth to celebrate, but also understand that we have more work to do. There's a great piece of artwork by Monica Trinidad, one of my favorite artists, and Miriam Kaba, saying we have work to do. We can celebrate, but we still have more work to do. So let's take Juneteenth as a time to acknowledge how far we've come, but organize and understand that we still need more work to do for true freedom and justice for all.
Now, on that note, tell us about Light Up Lawndale.
Yeah, Light Up Lawndale was an initiative started by Princess Shaw. Princess Shaw is a third generation Lawndalian, raising the fourth generation of Lawndalians. So she's been living in North Lawndale her whole life, and her heart is there organizing for her community. She's really working on activities to create community cohesion, bring people together, bring people back together the way that they used to be. That's the way that she likes to put it. Like when people used to come out to the boulevard and just bring their grills and have a good time, when people just used to know everyone. And that's where Light Up Lawndale comes. It started originally as a Christmas event. She wanted to light up all of Lawndale with Christmas lights. She saw a lot of this work happening on the south side and wondered, why can't this happen on the west side? And so she organized and fundraised and had a big campaign to light up all the trees down Douglas Boulevard. And had an official tree lighting ceremony. That was last Christmas, Christmas 2020, during the pandemic. Going off of that momentum, she created Light Up Lawndale again this year in December 2021. We also lit up the trees on Douglas Boulevard, added some more Christmas trees, and had a great community Christmas party out on the boulevard. Now she wants to extend this to be sort of a year-long celebration. And so her vision is to have a Juneteenth kickback, the way that it used to be when she was a kid. Bring out the grills, have some celebrations, celebrate the old timers, as she likes to say, and just have a good time out on the boulevard. She enlisted the help of us at the Lawndale Pop Up Spot, as well as a whole bunch of other organizations in North Lawndale, including the North Lawndale Historical and Cultural Society, to turn this kickback into a big celebration of Juneteenth, of our fathers, a celebration of our fathers, and a celebration of our history, as well as looking forward. How are we going to continue this community cohesion efforts moving forward? And so we've partnered with Erica and the Chicago History Museum to really bring some heft behind the party and turn it into a significant cultural event for the organization, for the community. Which is interesting because right now, at the same time in Douglas Park, there's Summer Smash. Lyrical Lemonade is taking over the entire park. And so in some ways we've been removed from the park and pushed out onto the boulevard, which is a whole nother thing in itself. We could have a whole conversation about us being pushed out of our own neighborhood park onto the boulevards, but that's for another day.
Well, Chelsea, wait a minute, that just took my whole mind off into a whole nother tangent. A whole nother tangent there. Where is, for people who don't know, and then, you hear West Side and people just put up the blinders. Where is Lawndale?
Yes, North Lawndale is just south of 290. So the border is about western, all the way to the western edge of the city, to Cicero. 290 to about Ogden, but Ogden is a diagonal, so almost down to Cermak. It's kind of a big rectangle right south of 290 on the western edge of the city. As Bonnie said, as you said, I used to work at the DuSable. I did all my community organizing on the south side until I started working on the Lawndale Pop Up Spot, which put me on the west side. And it's just very interesting to see the differences between the south side and the west side. But my goal is to unite us as one Black community, Southsiders and Westsiders coming together. So everyone, if you're watching and you live on the south side, come over to the west side and see how we do it over here.
And it's true because neither side is the best side. Even though the west side is the best side, the south side is, it's almost, how do I put it? It's almost like two different parts of the South entered into two different sections of the city. You've got Tennessee and whatever on the south side or whatever, and then you had Mississippi and whatever on the west side, or vice versa. I don't know. I'm from Champaign. My folks originated in Tennessee. But anyway,
right.
But either way, you bring the culture, the style of dress, the style of party, even the different styles of Chicago stepping is different on each side, and which makes it a great cultural mix when you bring them all together. Chelsea, what is the pop-up spot?
Yes, the Lawndale Pop Up Spot is a community museum in a shipping container at the corner of Central Park and Douglas Boulevard. So my co-founder, Jonathan Kelly, and I started doing some organizing work in North Lawndale in 2016. The same time I was working at the DuSable, I started doing work on the west side. And we saw an opportunity to create a community museum, which is a museum that's entirely led by the community. So the community gets to decide what our themes are, what type of museum we are. We could be an art museum, we could be a history museum, we've been a science museum, we could be any type of museum, because we basically have a box with 4 white walls that we could turn into whatever the community wants us to be. And so it's hard to pin us down, but we are a community space for people to exhibit what is important to them, to help them find meaning. We really think that museums, as Erica said, are great places to, learn about yourself, learn about your history, learn about where you are, learn about where you want to go. And so we want to help the community make that meaning through our exhibitions at the Pop Up Spot.
And the community has really embraced you?
Yeah, we've been, a part of our work at the Lawndale Pop Up Spot is just being present at other initiatives. My co-founder, Jonathan, works on a litter campaign for North Lawndale. What does that have to do with museums? Not that much, but we just want to be a part of all of the great things going on in the community so that people trust us and see us as a great community resource.
Awesome. And Erica, tell us a little bit about the Chicago History Museum.
I sure can. And before I dive into that, the work that Chelsea is doing in Lawndale is outstanding. And, I did want to pick up on one thing that you were saying about Jonathan's efforts with, keeping the streets clean and so on. When you bring an institution to a space, it's like you have to consider all the community needs that folks might have in. What he is doing does impact, and it does help to build that trust with the folks that you want to come in and engage with you. So it all makes sense, even when you might not think that it does. But when you bring an institution and you're looking to bring a service or whatever it is to a place, it's also thinking about how you're going to get people to trust your presence there. And I just continue to applaud the work that you do. The Chicago History Museum has been around for a very long time, 1856. It is known as the city's oldest cultural institution. There are millions of objects, images, artifacts, and the like that speak to Chicago stories. But as always, with institutions that are intended to be for all, sometimes there are blind spots and areas where we could do better. And so getting more in tune with community, just what I was saying to Chelsea a moment ago, is important. If we are to spread ourselves and be of service to the entire city, we have to make those connections with community. So the work that we're doing right now with Up Lawndale and Juneteenth is intended to do that. It is sharing and providing whatever resources we can to assist with public history programs or public memory programs like Juneteenth and Father's Day. We would like to be there to be of support. This is a newer initiative at the History Museum. It's being undertaken by our education department to do the work to provide whatever we can to build up trust, to get our audiences to see that we do believe that there are stories everywhere, which is, interestingly enough, is something that I've heard quite often about the West Side, that there is no history there, which is absolute, is difficult to hear. Crazy, difficult to hear. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But, knowing that is not the case, knowing that there are stories everywhere and that they are all worthy because they all tie together to create this unique thing that is Chicago. How can the History Museum go out, engage, and help make people think differently about spaces than what they thought they knew? That's also part of our initiative. So providing service, providing resources, whatever that may look like. This is our new endeavor and the new way that the History Museum is looking to partner with organizations across the city. So more to come from the History Museum on this front.
And North Lawndale has so much history,
the one thing I have to say is...
Oh, I was just going to say, North Lawndale has so much history.
No, go ahead, Chelsea, go ahead.
Yeah, as everyone knows, or as many people know, When Martin Luther King came to Chicago, where did he stay? He stayed right on 16th Street in North Lawndale. Where did he preach? At Stone Temple Baptist Church in North Lawndale. This is where he decided to stay in the city. He came to North Lawndale. There's a big history of why he stayed in North Lawndale and what that means. North Lawndale is the home place of house music. Everyone knows Chicago is the home place for house music, but where did it start? On the west side. So there's a lot of history over here that we at the Pop Up Spot want to show to make sense, make meaning, and we also want to help the Chicago History Museum so that they can also showcase these histories for people who might not come to the west side as well.
Well, the one thing I have to say is that a lot of organizations or museums in particular want everyone to come to them. And the key thing is, and I was once director of community relations, to know is that to get people to come to you, you have to first go to them to let them know that you are involved in their stories and what they're about and enhancing them. And then they will come and support you because they know of the support that you're giving to them. And so many times institutions will just stay stagnant in their place and wonder why the halls are empty or whatever. It's because you haven't done the outreach. And the Chicago History Museum, I am happy to say, is expanding because of you, Erica, and the education department. It's expanding because now they understand the importance of all of the history of Chicago, not just the Chicago fire, but the Black people who were involved in saving things during the Chicago fire, which we never heard about. Not just, the Chicago this or the Chicago that, but Black Chicago. I never knew that Black people were downtown or South Loop was all Black. I didn't know that until you brought that to my attention, Erica, and the exhibits and things that you and the Chicago History Museum is doing about that. So Chelsea, tell us where, when, what time, how we get there, and everything for Sunday, Juneteenth.
Yeah, so Juneteenth will be at Douglas and Kedzie on Douglas Boulevard. So the boulevard is one long stretch of path of greenery, of trees, of beautifulness. So we're going to take up that space. Douglas and Kedzie across the street from St. Agatha Church. We're going to shut down the street and block it off and have a DJ, have performances, have a celebration of North Lawndale's elders, and food, fun, vendors, all sorts of good times, education, all of the things. So that event is from 4 p.m. until 9 p.m. But, as is tradition, it's more like 4 until ? 4 until we decide we are wrapped up for the evening. So it's just going to be a nice time to come out. And if you're not from the West Side, come and check us out. See what we're doing out on the boulevard. We have fun events all summer long on the boulevard. So come on out and see us.
Is there an admission price?
No, everything's free. It's out there. It's like a street fest. It's going to be like Lollapalooza, but for Juneteenth. It's very fun out there on the street.
Yeah. And parking, we got to, we on the south side, we got to, where we going to park, so we can park in the neighborhoods.
Of course. You can park on this boulevard. Douglas and Kedzie to St. Louis or to Albany will be shut down. But anywhere before that, anywhere west of that, you can park there. You can park on Kedzie. It's one of those drive around. There's a ton of street parking around there. So there's no parking lot. Just drive around, find your spot, park, and walk over to Douglas and Kedzie.
Well, I am happy to say that I will be there. I can't wait to see everybody else there. Is there going to be a hashtag or anything, because, social media is the thing now. Are you guys creating a hashtag or whatever?
No, I don't think we have a hashtag planned. I think it's more just like being present, being in the moment with each other more than social media and all of that. So maybe we'll think of something before then. We'll see. Come to the event and see. But you can follow us on social media if you're not able to make it, or you just want to see how things are going, where they at before you're like, who all is there before you come out. You could follow us on social media at Light Up Lawndale or at Lawndale Pop Up Spot on Instagram.
Is there a website?
For Light Up Lawndale, I don't think so. But if you go on our social medias, that's going to be the best way to do it.
Okay.
There is an Eventbrite for the Juneteenth event, and I don't want to read a URL for you all, but if there's a way to share it later, I can share it with you.
Okay, and is there a website for Lawndale Pop Up Spot?
Yes, it's lawndalePopUpSpot.org.
Okay, and Erica, any final words from you? And also give us the Chicago History Museum's website.
So the Chicago History Museum's website is chicagohistory.org. And just echoing Chelsea, come out and engage with us. You know, we love edutainment as a people. So we'll have lots of fun. We'll be learning along the way. And we hope that all of you join us to engage right alongside us. So we'll see you then.
Thank you so much, both of you. I really appreciate you coming on. I can't wait to see the two of you on Sunday. And everybody, celebrate Juneteenth. If you can't make it out to Lawndale or any of the other wonderful things that are going on this Juneteenth, make sure you do something even at home, if it's nothing but reading about it, talking to your children about it, having great conversations. Celebrate Juneteenth, because that was the time that all of us were considered free. Thank you guys. I appreciate you coming. And until next time, everybody, keep your eye to the sky.